So I'm going to introduce myself and set the scene really briefly. I'm Paige. I lead the community at the Nature Tech Collective. For those who are new, welcome. These are webinars that we hold on a regular basis. We're a global community of people that are working at the intersection of technology and nature. And we bring together the builders, the buyers, the scientists, the investors, the policymakers who are trying to make this world nature positive. These Nature Tech in Action webinars exist precisely for that. We're trying to get to the real version of working between technology and nature with the complexity of dealing with that. And today's session has all of that. The Nature Positive Initiative has spent years developing a set of state of nature metrics. It's a framework designed to give companies, for the first time, a really consistent and credible way to measure their relationship with biodiversity. In our field, it's a question that's asked constantly. How do we get to standardized metrics? So that's the ambition, but obviously ambition and application are two very different things. And today we have two incredible companies that have worked together to pilot these metrics. We've got NatureHelm, led by Debbie Saunders. They ran what is the largest pilot of these metrics anywhere in the world. It was across 5 countries, more than 800,000 hectares, if I'm not mistaken, of managed forestry assets, and about 34 million hectares of surrounding landscape assessments. Debbie, you'll correct these numbers if I got them wrong. But we've also got Emily Simso from New Forests. They're a sustainable asset manager with over $12 billion in asset under management across global forestry and natural capital. You were the client and the collaborator, and we've got you two at the table to talk about it. So that's fantastic. Debbie and Emily, I'm really glad to have you both here, and we're just about to get into it with the first question. We'll start with you, Debbie. Just so you can set context about NatureHelm. You've been around for a while, but for people who are meeting you for the first time and your platform, your technology, can you tell us what you do and the problem you're fundamentally trying to solve?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paige. It's really awesome to be here and be part of the community. At NatureHelm, we're a biodiversity intelligence platform, and what we're really trying to do is transform how businesses relate to and manage their interface with nature so that we can all have a much more sustainable and resilient future. And we do this by providing businesses with granular biodiversity intelligence to manage risks and really make strategic decisions, as well as unlock nature-based financial opportunities. So it's really about taking a species lens on the ground all the way up to metrics at a high level for the board. So really creating that bridge between the reality for nature on the ground and the decisions and the finances at the top of a company. So that's what NatureHelm does in a nutshell.
Thanks, Debbie. And you're an ecologist by training, if I remember well, and you'll tell us a little bit more about that. So you're deep into it.
Yeah, sorry, I should say that. I mean, I've got a PhD in conservation ecology, and I have spent most of my career working in conservation. So biodiversity has been at the heart of everything I've done. And this is my second nature tech startup, in fact. And it's really great to be able to see now that the corporate world is getting engaged in biodiversity so deeply and so actively compared to when I first started, my career many years ago, that biodiversity was a very dirty word, if anyone was wanting to do anything, but now it's actually seen as an asset, which is really exciting. So I think we're in a super exciting space right now.
A good narrative shift, yeah. And Emily, same question for you and for New Forests. Who are you? Why does nature measurement matter to a sustainable asset manager at your scale?
Thanks, Paige, and lovely to be in the virtual room with all of you today. So New Forest is a global natural capital investment manager headquartered in Sydney, but our current assets under management span over 4.4 million hectares across Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the United States. And so for us, having a consistent approach to nature measurement is critical for us. We manage forestry, agriculture, and natural capital assets, which are obviously highly dependent upon and impactful on nature. And we really need to be able to achieve that measurement at scale so that we're able to efficiently prioritize risks and opportunities, compare outcomes across our different geographies, report meaningful information up to our investors, and ultimately, hopefully, achieve greater positive impact across all those operating contexts.
Mm-hmm. And so before you found NatureHelm, what was the state of play? What were you trying to figure out? What wasn't working, perhaps?
Yeah, so there's been a real extensive amount of nature-related work that's been undertaken at our assets under management since New Forest was founded in 2005. And that includes a range of, on-ground monitoring program through different methods such as acoustics, game cams, research projects, and then partnerships with regional stakeholders. And this has led to a really large volume of data using a range of methodologies and inspiring, wonderful case studies that we regularly share with our investors and publicly. Really, our challenge was there was no common framework for measuring and communicating the outcomes of these projects, and particularly the ability to do that at scale. And, important to flag up front, we think that ground-based work is incredibly important and that has to continue, but we also need to assess the state of nature using lower granularity methods that help us achieve that 4.4 million hectare type scale. So we had that sort of problem, but at the same time, there's been this real proliferation of different standards and frameworks in the nature space. TNFD, SBTN, NPI, choose your acronym. It's really becoming quite noisy and a bit hard to know which way to go. But when we saw, the NPI coming together, it's 27 global NGOs and leading organizations that started and founded the NPI. Like, that's quite something. That really made us as New Forests sit up in our seats and recognize like something's happening here. So the reason we wanted to pilot the NPI was to help us answer the question of, can these state of nature metrics give us a credible and consistent view of the changes to nature that are happening across our portfolio using this kind of lower cost, more scalable method that Debbie was able to provide.
Okay. And Debbie, remind me, how did you and New Forest first connect? What was the brief actually when this project got started?
I believe that the first point I think there were multiple points. We kind of came together from different avenues. One was through a referral through a colleague. The other was actually we both attended an NPI webinar, which was about the pilot program itself, and we connected after that. And so it was great to be able to just like throw around ideas in the first instance with the company that was really exploring this, and then it came to something more. So
Great.
that was it was great.
So these webinars are somehow useful, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for people who haven't followed the Nature Positive Initiative closely, which I assume is not that many people in this room, Debbie, can you potentially give us a plain language explanation of, what the state of nature metrics are trying to do and why this pilot kind of really matters for this space?
Yeah, look, I think following on from what Emily said was, I think companies are really grappling with, what is it that I measure? How do I measure it? And then how do I scale that up as well? And so there's been a lot of work, from the Nature Positive Initiative to really develop some robust metrics that make sense at all different scales and for all different businesses. And there are so many different options out there, but this set of indicators really captures the core elements that I think are really important. So, I mean, we went into this quite open-eyed, and both Emily and I were like, well, we'll just see if they work, what do they look like? We hadn't even seen the guidance initially, so we were really going in just with a very open mind and seeing, well, what have these people worked out, and what will it take to make them work and follow the guidelines, but then also interpret that and how does that apply to the industry? And that was the real power. It was really about co-design. So New Forests and us were kind of just tacking backwards and forwards and really exploring ideas. And we put everything in place that was recommended. But then in some cases we had to come up with alternatives to really make something fit for purpose, if you like. But really you're looking at the function, the structure and the species, which really gives you that condition. That was a really important piece to the New Forest team, especially those on the ground, as to how they could do this condition piece in different landscapes with different species and different needs, all in one thing. So it was really, we didn't know if it was going to work or not, but we put it through its paces and came out with some really valuable insights, some challenges as well, for sure. But they essentially are based around the extent of ecosystems, the condition of those, and the species. And then there were some case-specific triggers that then, if you had priority ecosystems in your area, then you had to do an additional assessment, etc. So you sort of got deeper and deeper into it, depending on your context. And because New Forests, all of their assets have some intensive land use, we did all of the metrics, and there were, I think there ended up being 7 altogether that we did for New Forests across all the 5 countries. Did you want to add anything, Emily, into that?
Perfect summary. Thank you, Debbie.
Well, yeah, let's get into it actually. There were 5 countries, maybe explain a little bit more about that. Australia, the US, Africa, each of them had a different set of challenges. Yeah, let's set those scenes, plural.
Yeah, so this is just an overview of the 3 different regions where we were working. It was over 400,000 hectares of actual assets that we assessed, and that was across 5 countries. And then they were divided into conservation areas and plantation areas. So defining the site is, step number 1, locate, figure out what a site actually is, and that in itself can be an interesting exercise with different applications and different mapping methods, etc. And what we also did, which we'll talk about a bit further in, is like when we're looking at the landscape, we actually went much bigger than what they kind of suggested in the guidelines, and we can sort of explain why. But really different landscapes from the southwest of Western Australia to multiple countries across Africa, and then into the United States, and had different types of plantations, different types of harvesting, and different invasive species issues, for example. So I guess we'll just dive on in, and maybe I'll let Emily kind of lead the intro to it. We'll kick off with Australia.
Yep, so just do a quick squiz through each of these. So our pilot in Australia was actually the largest NPI pilot that was undertaken. This was in partnership with some regional stakeholders, including the South Coast Natural Resource Management, BirdLife Australia, and PF Olsen, which is a regional forestry asset manager here in Australia. And so really the reason we did kind of a landscape level pilot here was we wanted to understand like how useful are these NPI metrics for having conversations with your neighbor? Because it's one thing to measure and try and improve the state of nature within your own paddock, as we say over here. But if your neighbor is doing something destructive on the other side of the fence, that's really not leading towards long-term sustainability and positive outcomes. So we tested the metrics at one of our assets that's in the region. And so that's that 78,000 hectare scale. And then we did larger sites that is managed by the South Coast NRM at that 240,000 hectare scale. And so we really wanted to engage regional stakeholders here also to make sure that the results of the pilot were meaningful at that regional scale. These big international frameworks, we want to make sure it connects to regional priorities and data sources. And so partnering with these organizations and engaging a wide range of stakeholders through the process enabled us to sense check that, yeah, a global framework can be regionally applied and could be used locally. Certainly improvements that got flagged in terms of improving the regional data sources used and ability to connect to their work they're already doing is really important for us to kind of get that sense check from a broad range of stakeholders involved in this process. And maybe we can, go for it.
I thought I might just jump in. When we first met all of the players in this project, there was a lot of people doing amazing work. So that BirdLife had been doing surveys for 10 years, not only on New Forest but in the surrounding landscape. So there was a real wealth of data in that regard. And PF Olsen have been doing invasive species management, and they know the sites really intimately. So they had different types of data on invasive, like fox and cat control for conservation projects. mix, and the South Coast NRM brought in like the vineyards and the other agricultural producers and Indigenous landowners, and so it was a fascinating mix. It was wonderful to meet with all these different people, but there was this underlying feeling for everyone that like we're all doing all this stuff, but how can we bring that all together for New Forest as a whole, and how can we integrate that? So at the start, it was like, okay, this is like, well, there is a lot of people with a lot of data and a lot of different perspectives here. It'll be very interesting to see how this goes, but it was actually the power, because you have these people on the ground with intimate knowledge, and so you can do stuff remotely, but you give it to them and say, what do you think? Does this actually make sense to you? And that's incredibly validating.
Right, and my memory is that Australia was the place that you had that, where you had the most stakeholders and data to work with, whereas potentially the next one that we're going to see, the US, was the one where there was very little data.
So our US site, so this is a Northern California property that we're managing. It's a bit different than Australia in the context where, Australia had the clear delineation of here's our plantation, kind of working forest, conservation area over here, maybe agriculture on the further down. This is a semi-natural mixed use forest, so a very different operating context. This team is actually, they had just done a full year of game camera and acoustics monitoring. So they did have some of that kind of really rich on-ground data, but what they were sort of missing was that link to how do we connect that back to management decision making. And so that was the really interesting question. And it was great to see when we got the outputs from, Debbie and the team, that connection of, oh, we can actually start using this and building this in. For example, how can we use some of the data to inform our harvesting management plans to maintain connectivity of how species are moving, or how can we use this to prioritize conservation or restoration? And so that's a really great ability to draw that link from the on-ground data to an actual management activity and share that with investors. They can then see that real tangible value of doing something like game cameras. And hopefully that means they'll provide greater investment then into this sort of very sustainable nature-focused investment model. So that was a really great outcome from this US property.
Wonderful. And then before we go into actually how you work together, maybe setting the scene on the last continent.
Definitely. So yeah, the final continent was Africa. So we calculated the metrics across 3 countries, Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique. And this represents an asset within New Forest's African Forestry Impact Platform. These assets are a bit more similar to Australia, just in that you have that kind of clear delineation between plantation working forest and then conservation and restoration area. But what was really exciting is our African Forestry Impact Platform has 4 impact targets, which are linked to our performance fee as a manager. So we really want to achieve those. And the biodiversity impact target that we set at the start of the fund is to increase the area of quality habitat that's protected or restored by 14% over the life of the fund. But before doing this project with NatureHelm, we actually didn't have a methodology to track and measure that change consistently and, again, at scale. And so an extremely exciting outcome of the project was that, by including these regions in the pilot and working with Debbie, we were able to come up with a methodology that our investors in that platform have now approved for us to use for tracking the impact target and reporting back to them, which I think it's a great real world indication of how these metrics can be used to actually inform investment vehicle design and bringing investors into the conversation. The metrics were clear and concise enough that they could get their minds around it, and just the credibility and rigor of the approach we used also gave them confidence in that real world change.
That's terrific news. And speaking of, credibility and rigor, Debbie, maybe now that we've kind of set the scene and the different challenges, which are kind of wildly different across these landscapes, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I'll just make one more point about Africa, was that these are more recent acquisitions. And so in terms of that data from on the ground, that was lacking largely because they hadn't, they were still in the planning phase of, what is it that we need to do? actually wanted some guidance on what it is that they should start monitoring. So we worked with the team around gathering data that was publicly available, and in some places that was really quite limited. And so this is where looking across really massive catchment areas and even the entire ecoregions and looking at species observations can help then guide where you don't have data on the ground yet. It means that any company can get started because there's enough data, if not on the site, in the surrounding area, to guide first steps, and then you can always iterate and adapt over time. And so one of the other really great outcomes from this one was that they've now started doing some monitoring in some of the other African assets with some local tech companies, which is really fantastic. And so just giving the confidence to get started with something, and as soon as they actually have more data, that is reflected in the metric. So yeah, it was really stark between the 3 different continents as to the amount of data or what have you, but the great thing was that it literally could be applied in all of the different contexts. So what do we actually do? So the ecosystem extent was the first one, and I think that's the most basic one. That is, it's all remotely sensed or what have you, and I think most companies can do that type of a measurement. Where things were more complicated was really getting to the heart of site condition. There were recommendations in the guidance document. One of the main recommendations was you could use NDVI, so like a greenness index of vegetation, and that is certainly one way that vegetation is used in that way to look at condition in certain contexts. But from my experience as a researcher working on small migratory birds, I've often my research actually found the inverse of what people say about, if it's more green, it's better or what have you. But if you're working on nectivorous species, then if it's green, it's actually not flowering, and so therefore it actually has a negative correlation with whether something's going to be there. So I really wanted to make the most of the data on the ground and not just rely on remote sensing. And we really wanted to capture this, the structure, the function, and the species, like build in all these different components to really get a truer sense of what the actual state was on the ground. The end score is just a score from 1 to 100, and we were able to track change from 2020 until whichever year is the final year. In this pilot case, it was 2024. And we use this combination of remote sensing and mapping data. There's some examples here. Land cover ecosystems, that's a global ecosystem typology. We went down to level 5 with that. Also looked at catchments, different scales of catchments, and the SBT and natural lands layer was highly recommended as one of the inputs into what is natural and not natural. So we used all of these to different degrees and other layers as well. But then we also integrated the ground-based data. So some of this was aggregated from public data sources. It includes government, research organisations, citizen science, but then also integrated the work from various teams. So like, for example, in Africa, although they hadn't done any structured surveys, they had incidental observations from field staff. They were of varying quality, and so we would only include data that we could had some sort of evidence to back up what the identification was. And similar with any citizen science work that we included, it was only where it's like a research grade citizen science work. But you can really bring together all different types, so whether it's acoustic monitoring, camera traps, eDNA, whether you've actually got experts like BirdLife out there doing field surveys or citizen science. All of it helps to paint a picture. Not all of it is necessarily baseline data that's really robust. And so one of the key tricks in developing this metric was making it flexible enough to be able to integrate different types of data that were relevant in the context of any one particular site. So not every site has to have all of these things. It's really about what is the most important thing for the business at that location, and then focusing on that as a starting point. You can always broaden, but just to get started, because the longer you leave it to collect your baseline data, then the less credit you get for the work that you're doing, when you're creating positive change. I don't know if Emily wanted to sort of have any input in that as well.
Oh, good. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay. So that was the site level metrics. And then we got to the landscape scale, and there was the option, the recommendation was to do 50 kilometres out from the site. And we did do that. We explored all different ratios actually. But what we thought would be most impactful or most meaningful from an ecological point of view would be to look at the catchment. Some of the sites were, like in Western Australia, were right down on the coast, and 50 kilometres goes out to sea. And so it's not necessarily even within that catchment that the site exists in. So we did all of the different calculations, but we focused in on the catchment. We also think it really helps to link the terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems because we have data across all of those, but really wanting to make it as meaningful as possible. But the core components that we looked at were exactly the same. So I think there were some differences in the guidance documents, but we wanted to be able to look at the same information at the site, but also at the landscape, so that you can really get a sense of, what are we missing, what more should we be expecting, etc. So we built in the same components, and there wasn't really a score as such, I guess. It was more about having the same components because that kind of is the reference, the reference state, if you like, if there's nothing to really compare it to. And so we did it in that way, but the connectivity, this is what really sort of, I guess, popped out in this example of a really big value piece for new forests, whereby we did this functional connectivity analysis looking at where across the whole catchment are the bottlenecks, which opens up, it's both the risks and the opportunities, right? So wherever there's a bottleneck, if that is severed, then it has potential implications on the function of your site. So you might be doing the best work in the world, but if someone outside of your boundary is doing something to sever a major corridor, then no matter what you do, you're not going to get the inflow or the movement of species. And so being able to really identify where those are and then enable collaboration or asset acquisition or whatever. I'll actually let Emily sort of talk to the value that New Forest got from that, but that was probably one of the more surprising outcomes that we had, that doing it at this scale actually created so much value. Yeah, over to you, Emily.
Yeah, I think this landscape connectivity piece definitely resonated with the team, I think the most, because they could see that connection with the wider landscape that's so important for us, working in this natural capital space. And I think just this result sparked a lot of thinking too about how could we use this and the metrics more broadly in future acquisition activities if we want to maximize certain components of nature or biodiversity. How could we use this for strategic planning and informing management decisions, conservation priorities? So I think being able to see this visually for the team made them get really excited, and that was ultimately a great sign of success for the pilot, was that it could connect to that real world management decision making.
Thank you. Yeah, we're kind of on the connectivity part. Emily, when you saw all of the results there, what was your reaction, or what did it open up that maybe you hadn't anticipated at the start?
Yeah, I mean, going back to our original question, we were just doubting, maybe concerned we wouldn't be able to even do this across all these really diverse different landscapes. As Debbie mentioned, we had different types of data, different quality of data, obviously very different operating contexts. And so first, I was just so excited that we could prove out this concept of, yes, we can do this at scale in all these different operating regions, and that we were able to account for that different level of data availability. And something exciting too was just, being able to design, particularly the site condition metric, to be very responsive to what teams are doing on the ground. So if they do invasive control, that's going to get picked up in the tool, it's going to get measured, and then hopefully their site conditions score will go up. And it just connects the work that's happening on the ground with this measure that investors are ultimately interested in seeing. So that was a big one. But also I think, working with Debbie, that has such a delightful curiosity for how we can keep using these metrics and realizing like, oh, we can use them for other things. It's not, just for reporting or management. We can also use them for different compliance pieces, thinking about how can we use them and linking it to third-party certification, IFC performance standards, different measures. That was a great kind of multi-use outcome of the metrics.
Wonderful. And, Debbie, as the rigorous ecologist that you are, I think we can also start getting into the critiques or what you might say about these nature metrics.
Yeah, look, I think there were 7 metrics all up that we ended up doing with the different subcategories, etc. And some of them, these ones worked really well. It took a lot of work behind the scenes to really push the boundaries of what was possible and explore, new parameters that put into an algorithm or what have you, and just see what the response was. But the one that I guess we had the biggest challenge around was the natural versus semi-natural condition. I mean, we did it. We followed the methods that were recommended, and we implemented that. But as soon as we did, we could see that, at least for the forest industry, that it wasn't going to cut it. It wasn't sensitive enough to be able to pick up the granularity of the regrowth of a forest, or like when a plantation had been replanted. And maybe I'll let Emily sort of speak to that a bit as well.
Yeah, I think it kind of went to this, the data sets that were recommended were almost saying like anything green also is natural. And of course we know that there are benefits to biodiversity in plantations, not to the same extent as a conservation or restoration zone, but they're also not natural, especially, if, for example, the Australian context. And so having that sort of simplistic differentiation didn't work. And then there was, so it was kind of one challenge. Second challenge being, we are harvesting these plantations, they are getting replanted. But of course, they're little trees and they go into the ground. And the models are picking that up as a land use change or a deforestation event. When no, this is actually just a sustainable management regime. So we had to work with the teams to really map and identify where is our production area and how can we code that differently so when something does get harvested, it doesn't trigger alarm bells in the system. But it's just, we need to perhaps overlay that with our harvesting plans. And so again, that integration of different data layers in the future to make sure that we're only tracking adverse land use change in conservation zones, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of the initial just ecosystem extent and the change in extent, I think across all of the sites, overall, it didn't really change very much because there was always harvesting and there was always planting. And so it kind of balanced out. But when you looked at the maps, I think maybe that was quite shocking for some people to see big,
Yes.
the loss was red and the gain was green. And there was a lot of red because it's an active plantation forest estate. And so I think it was interesting just to kind of see just the visual response. So a lot of what we do is visualizing the same data in multiple different ways. So some is in tables and numbers and maps, and then there's charts and what have you. And so it was interesting that the map and the visualization of it was really striking for people. So that was for the condition as well as for the connectivity. That was the really the piece that people could really connect with quite easily, but also could be quite shocked when looking at it, when it's actually this is plantation, it's supposed to happen. And so since the pilot program, I mean, it's still in the consultation phase, and they're still finalising what these metrics will be. But I believe that the natural, semi-natural breakdown is maybe not going to be included in the metrics moving forward. I think there was a lot of challenges for a lot of different companies. I think this sort of thing can be readily done at small scales, but doing it at this massive scale was more challenging. So, but our team, we have these amazing data scientists who have a background in neural networks and what have you, and have this immense ability to think about complex things really, really deeply. And so since the pilot program has finished, we've been working on solutions to that. And it's been really exciting to see. There's always new data sources coming out. And so we've actually now just in the testing phases, the final testing phases of having a solution for that at scale, which is really exciting. So although I don't think it will be part of the NPI metrics, that differentiating for natural and semi-natural, I think Emily can sort of maybe convey like where that's needed, but I think, IFC, the International Finance Corporation, needs it, and some of the TNFD, also specifies how much is natural and not natural. So I think it will be useful more broadly.
Thank you both. And just so that we can have a proper Q&A moment, I'll move us on to the next question, which is, Emily, where's New Forest actually going with all of this information now? What would you say to other asset managers who are still trying to figure out where to start as well with their landscapes?
Yeah, so we're excited that we're going to be rolling out the calculations across our global portfolios. That will include new geographies and asset types, including agriculture, which we didn't consider within the pilot. And so I'm sure that will all present some really interesting new learnings and challenges. And we're already diving into it with Debbie and the team. But we're also really excited to explore how we can use the metrics to kind of address this overarching challenge that nature isn't getting valued in financial decision making. And so we really need to connect the data that we're collecting now in a very consistent way with financial outcomes. Hopefully that can help drive greater investment into the space and solve some of that collective challenge of how do we halt and reverse nature loss. But really, just having this credible data as the foundation for being able to present the investment case at scale. As to the where to start question, I think, and Debbie said it already, just get started. For organizations, first step is defining the question or the problem that's most meaningful to your business. Just pick a methodology or a framework or a metric, whatever helps you answer that question, and just see how you go. Our pilot definitely taught me that you don't need to have everything in place before you start. Also, that remote data sets are really rapidly improving. And so that's a great place to start and get that initial level of information. And it's really just amazing what can be achieved if you start looking and working on it. And selfishly, shameless plug, definitely would encourage others to look into the NPI and see if that would fit for your organization. Because I do think it'll really help as we all, if we can start measuring these things consistently to help with comparison and understanding and ultimately improving the quality of those metrics. So that would also be an amazing outcome.
Well, no, that's an interesting point of view here, that it was successful enough that you would recommend it, basically. Great. Okay, final question before we move to the Q&A. And everyone, just as a preemptive note, please do rate your organizations if you haven't renamed yourself yet, and prepare any questions that you might have. You can drop them in the chat too. But Debbie, final question. What do you think this project proves about what's possible in biodiversity measurement right now, or nature measurement right now? And what's the thing you're most excited to build next?
So I think, well, it proved to me as well. I wasn't sure how this was going to go at the beginning either, in terms of when I was speaking to the African team, saying, we really want to know how can you tell us what the condition on the ground is? And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to get some insight from you on that, because you're the experts on the ground, and I'm just helping to pull it all together. And it was very interesting to just go through the process and see that any data that you have, and often it can be management data that you already have, like invasive species management, but may not have been capturing it in a way that you thought might be valuable, can really contribute. And so there are ways of integrating just the different pieces of information, making sure that what we've done is make sure that we can bring in whatever data is available in different areas into this one set of metrics. And so it's really possible. It's very, you can just do it at this scale that you see here, and it's not hard once you know what the methods are. like we can, there's a lot of crunching in the background, there's a lot of processing or what have you, but companies don't need to worry about that. We provide, transparency on all of that, of course, but it really is as simple as, the output is, a few numbers for each site, which then can be compiled at the portfolio level. So it's been really wonderful to kind of see the response of the people on the ground in particular, because without them, you wouldn't have that verification that we've had. And just being able to do it at this scale, I think is super exciting. As a conservation ecologist working on, spent most of my career working on migratory species, to have something that operates at the right scale for nature, I think is so important. And I feel really grateful for the opportunity to work with New Forests and their openness to when things worked, when things didn't work, always, digging up data and just the agility with which we worked. It was just a delight, to be honest, and really exciting that we can kind of help set the standard and really break it down for companies and make it digestible, accessible, but also profitable, so that we can do even more good work on the ground.
Thank you, Debbie and Emily. Obviously, we weren't able to cover everything, and there's so much more to be said about everything that you achieved together. So yes, I was going to say, please, let's get some emails up on the screen so we can see how people can contact you next. Audience, I am now doing the settings so that you can speak. And let me find them again. Ask all to unmute is what I'm trying to find. And we already have several questions in the chat. There we go.
So should I might just start answering. I can see one there from Daniela. Really great comment. It says, given that forestry landscapes often exist along a gradient between natural, semi-natural, and highly managed, how can biodiversity metrics avoid oversimplifying these categories while still remaining useful for investors and decision makers? That's the exact challenge that we found with that natural, semi-natural classification, in that it was oversimplified. It just wasn't granular enough to be able to look at those differences. And the answer to that question is new data sources, more using machine learning and new multi-dimensional satellite imagery, and a combination of different types of data together is where it's at and where it can really create that positive change. And that's where we're having some success now in being able to do this at scale. So not just, in a particular site, but over entire ecoregions or what have you, and actually getting much, much more granular. And so, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where we'll end up with that, but it's exciting. There's some really great stuff out there now that we're working with, and I think that it will be immensely helpful for having transparency at scale, for sure.
Thank you. It looks like, yeah, you're just charging ahead, Debbie, which is great. From Daniel, is this visibility available for individuals? Do you need more context on that question?
Yeah, I guess it just can individuals have access to this? Yeah, I mean, yep. Would you like to go ahead?
No, that was the question, because I am not a organization or big enough, but I'd love to see how it can work with what we're trying to do in the future. So just how do we learn from what you're doing?
What are you, have you got a personal project, or is it like a regional initiative?
No,
that you're
I have
working
an obsession. My thing is, I'm trying to find a way of articulating how we put the needs that are common between us, like everyday household goods, in a way that we can surface those needs and collate and coordinate the fulfillment, so that the profit from that work drives the funding of nature. So I want to put the fundraising into the everyday So your shower product, your kitchen product, all those types, like the simple basic things, I want them to drive the fundraising without having to go through the whole make a company, sell a company for a ton of money, set up a foundation, give a part of that money to an organization like Emily runs so that she can look after it. It's like, no, I want everyone to have the direct contact ability to affect this work. So I'm trying
Daniel,
to map that back.
that's really obviously an amazing question.
Sorry.
And also, it's like way too much to answer probably for Debbie. Do you mind if we park a pin in that? And then, please.
I might just do one quick response to it. Because we are working with other organizations that are working with cooperatives of like small landholders or what have you in India, for example, or underprivileged communities. And some of the work that we're doing, like with the connectivity mapping, can really help try and drive getting funding to the ground for initiatives to have regional benefits. So I think there's definitely scope for many different applications like this. So you feel free to drop me a line, and we can have a chat for sure.
Thank you.
The next question is from Daniel Fairweather for Emily. Will you be using this information for regulatory reporting, TNFD, or perhaps to access biodiversity credit markets?
Yes, so as part of the NPI pilot, every piloting company was paired with one of the NGOs that's involved in the NPI. And so our partner was the TNFD. And so we were testing, could these data be used as part of your LEAP assessment or TNFD? The answer was some of it, yes, can slot in, locate a bit on evaluating dependency impacts, risks, and opportunities. It's not the full picture using the NPI metrics, but it can get you part of the way there. The TNFD does have a consultation open at the moment in partnership with the GRI and SBTN on adopting the NPI metrics and making them formalized core indicators within the TNFD. So I think we will see that convergence of frameworks, which is a relief for those of us that have to deal with multiple competing systems. On the markets piece, we are interested in that. I think one of the barriers to entry at the moment to biodiversity credits is just you need a vast amount of on-ground data to get a project up and running, and the costs of that can actually be prohibitive to developing a project. So kind of keen to explore, could we use satellite remotely sensed data to supplement some of that on ground so that more projects can get going and started, which would obviously be phenomenal. So yeah, interested in exploring how we can roll that in. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Emily. Zara has a question around just getting a little bit deeper. What condition scoring systems you used, how you combine site-based data with global data sets, and how you tracked or visualized the data over time. Debbie, is that something you can answer?
Yeah, I'll just go back to the site condition metrics here. So the scoring system, so we used the guidelines for NPI, but then we adapted them as we needed to incorporate different types of data, and we developed algorithms to look at the condition score. And what we actually did was we just used public data to start with for all of the sites, and then we actually gathered together the data from the teams on the ground and then had a look at what does that do? Does that actually turn the dial in terms of the condition score? And that's where we really discovered that this was really impactful and meaningful for the people on the ground, because we were able to show an improvement in condition from the control of invasive species in particular, which was it's a tricky thing to navigate because invasive species are a key impact driver and a negative thing. But if you're actually managing that, then it can be turned around into a positive. And it's a general thing that companies who manage land assets need to do anyway. And so being able to actually show that that is a contributor positively to biodiversity was really great. In terms of how we combined the site-based data with the global, all of our data is geospatially located. And so we have a big map, and everything is mapped out. Every species is a dot on a map, and where there's too many, we aggregate them, but there's a list of all the species, their status, it's all downloadable. There's there's also charts. So like I say, there's different people, like some people love the tables because they just want to see the actual numbers, and then the charts are a quick visual check, and the map really shows the spatial configuration of where these things are happening in the landscape. So in terms of tracking things over time, it's about having the data availability, and we were able to get data no problem from 2020 onwards. You could actually go back further with some of the data sets as well, but as you go back further and further, it gets more coarse. And so from 2020 onwards, there's actually quite nice resolution data.
Thanks, Debbie. I do see there's a hand raised. Ngaitonde. I'm not quite sure.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Debbie and team, for the nice talk. Quite insightful. I had a couple of questions. Maybe you mentioned this, but I missed. So I wanted to know what were these sites before you started intervention? Were these like restoration sites? And a follow-up question to that is, how did you like set the baseline? So in particular, did you compare this with a reference scenario? And did you also consider what would be the levels if no intervention would have taken place? Suppose, say, natural regeneration or natural relocation of species. And my last question is, how do you gauge the outcomes? A lot of parameters to gauge the conditions, but any specific parameters that could say are indicative of the positive outcomes of the actions?
So I'll see if I can remember all the questions, but
So sorry, too many questions.
that's okay. The measurement piece, species, is how the species and extent, I guess, are the things that really guide whether or not it has been successful. So actually having changes in numbers over time that have been observed or recorded in one way or another. So that is the ultimate. I mean, like carbon is, the climate change metric, and species are the unit. In my mind, habitat is obviously a really important part, but you can have habitat that is empty and void of life and not functional. So we really like to focus on the species. So that's where that we look at it. In terms of the landscapes, Emily would be better positioned to sort of talk about sort of what they were and what they are now.
Yeah, so all of the sites are working forestry sites, and they've been in, productive forestry land use for quite a long time. But, noting that within that landscape, there are designated areas of conservation or restoration zone, and that's probably where there's a bit more nuance. Some of those have been conservation sites for a decade, and some of those maybe they're just getting started on a restoration program. So a bit more variety there.
Okay. So did you factor in natural regeneration and, if, suppose, what would be the scenario if, we couldn't have taken any positive actions around this?
And I'm just going to interject with, can we do a rapid fire answering at this point? Because we've got 5 minutes left and more questions in the chat.
Yeah. Yes, would pick up natural revegetation. No, did not do a counterfactual.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
People moving forward though.
Yeah.
All right, question from Hubert from Pontera.
I can read that.
Yes.
10,000 hectare native forest restoration project. They've done lots of work, which is awesome. Well done. I love the diversity you've got there. How do we turn this data into finance, into further biodiversity work? Well, I think first of all, get it into this metric format would be my first response, because once you have it in this format, then you can use it to unlock green loans or to access finance or get investment. So I think actually, whether you have existing data, you've got lots of data, so you're in a really strong point to demonstrate that you've created positive change, and you can continue that moving forward.
Thank you, Debbie. All right, from Thomas Murray, to what extent have you been able to provide data that articulates the value of projects in terms of resilience or ecosystem services?
Yeah, great. Actually, this was one tiny bit hidden in the NPI that did mention ecosystem services. It was like it was tacked on at the last minute. But this is something we really really passionate about, and something that we do as a standard with all of the species data. We translate that into the ecosystem services by underpinning it with the ecology. And so what we've also been doing with New Forests and looking to explore this further in natural capital accounting, and actually being able to quantify that over time. So all of this is geared directly towards that kind of an outcome, which has been really exciting to see that market mature as well.
Lovely. And last one from Meg, were there any specific species or taxonomic groups that you would have liked to have more data on across sites?
Oh, I know what I want, but what about New Forests, Emily?
Yeah, I think we went into it a bit species agnostic. And we try not to put a lot of expectations on our teams just because, data availability is so varied. I think the one thing that's kind of increasingly of interest is actually aquatic species. We, obviously have large aquatic systems running through the estates. And so that's actually one that came up to teams. They're really interested in aquatic species, riparian zones, that sort of intersection with the landscape. So I think that's sort of our next maybe a wish list of species.
I think as well that soil biodiversity is often underestimated and underappreciated, and I think it's a really key part to both production and natural landscapes. And I think that I would really love to see more innovation in like the invertebrate monitoring space, for example, because I think birds, mammals, plants, reptiles, amphibians, all the vertebrates are much better positioned than the invertebrates, and yet the invertebrates is where all the food chains begin. And the microorganisms even as well, and what have you, the fungi are all really critical. So I think all those things under the ground in particular is my wish list in terms of getting more insights on looking after the land and seeing it thrive.
I echo that sentiment. And with that, with 1 minute left to spare, thank you so much, Emily and Debbie, for your presentation. Thank you so much to the audience for all your questions. Hubert, I see that you have one last one, but perhaps you can email it. And yeah, just congratulations on this massive pilot and presenting it so well, really. So we always finish right on time. And that's it for us today.